They all gave up on the millionaire's daughter. Nobody believed she could find her way back. The world moved on, like she had vanished into thin air. Maybe you're serving tables for people who don't appreciate it, or cleaning up after everyone else has left. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise today's story will touch your heart. My name is Rosa Martinez, and for 37 years, I've been a waitress at Murphy's Diner on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. 37 years of coffee-stained aprons, swollen feet, and customers who look right through me like I'm part of the wallpaper. My hands tell stories. Deep lines carved by hot plates, burns from the grill, calluses from endless hours gripping heavy trays. These hands have served thousands of meals, wiped away countless spills, and somehow managed to hold my family together when everything else was falling apart. Every morning at 4:30, my alarm pierces the darkness of my tiny apartment in Queens. The radiator clanks like an old ghost, and the smell of my neighbor's cigarettes seeps through paper-thin walls. I pull on the same black shoes I've worn for 3 years. The sole's worn down to nothing, but they're all I can afford. The subway ride into Manhattan is a symphony of grinding metal and tired faces. 45 minutes of standing room only, pressed against strangers who smell like coffee and desperation. Murphy's Diner sits on Rivington Street, wedged between a pawn shop and a bodega that never seems to close. The neon sign flickers, has been flickering for the past decade, casting an unsteady red glow on cracked sidewalks. Inside, the black and white checkered floor has seen better days, and the red vinyl booths are held together with duct tape and prayers. But it's home. It's been my second home longer than anywhere else I've ever lived. The customers come in waves. Early morning construction workers ordering coffee black and eggs over easy. Lunch rush office workers checking their phones while inhaling salads they won't finish. Late night partygoers stumbling in for greasy burgers to soak up alcohol, and scattered throughout the day. The wealthy ones. The ones who live in glass towers overlooking Central Park, who step out of black cars that cost more than I'll make in 5 years. They're the hardest to serve. Not because they're demanding, though they are, but because of the way they look at me, or rather, the way they don't look at me at all. I'm invisible to them, a function, not a person. They snap their fingers, leave exact change for bills but no tip, and discuss million-dollar investments while I refill their coffee cups like I don't have ears. The stock market fluctuations are killing my portfolio. One woman complained to her friend last Tuesday, her diamond bracelet catching the fluorescent light. She was talking about losing what I make in 3 months, upset about it like it was the end of the world. When I asked if she needed anything else, she handed me her credit card without even glancing up. No please, no thank you. Just expected service from the furniture. But I've learned to find dignity in the small things. The way I remember how customers like their coffee without being asked. The gentle way I place the check on the table instead of slapping it down. The smile I give even when my feet are screaming and my back aches. My mother always told me, "Rosa, you can't control how people treat you, but you can control how you carry yourself." So I carry myself with quiet pride, even when the world tries to make me small. My manager, Mr. Peterson, is a thin man with nervous energy who treats waitresses like we're replaceable parts in a machine, which, to be fair, we probably are. "Rosa, table 6 is waiting," he'll bark, like I'm not already carrying 4 plates and mentally calculating which customer needs their check and who wants more coffee. He never asks how I'm doing, never notices when I stay late to help close, never acknowledges that I haven't called in sick once in 3 years. The other waitresses, Maria, Janet, and Dolores, were like soldiers in an army nobody cares about. We cover for each other when someone's kids are sick. We split tips when someone gets stiffed by a table. We complain about sore feet and rude customers, but we also laugh about the absurd things people say when they think we're not listening. Last month, I heard a businessman explain to his son that working people just don't try hard enough to succeed. I was standing right there, having worked 60 hours that week. Do you know what it's like to be invisible? Really invisible? Not just ignored, but treated like you don't exist as a real person with thoughts, feelings, dreams. I have a daughter, Carmen, who's studying nursing at community college. I'm proud of her. So proud it makes my chest tight with joy. But when customers ask about my family while making small talk, their eyes glaze over when I tell them about Carmen's grades or her goals. They don't actually want to know. They're just filling silence while they wait for their food. I have dreams too. Had dreams. I wanted to open a small restaurant once, a place where every customer would feel welcomed and seen. I saved money in mason jars hidden in my bedroom, counting quarters and crumpled bills. But life happened. Carmen needed textbooks. The rent went up. My mother got sick and needed medicine. Dreams got pushed into dark corners where nobody could see them gathering dust. The wealthy customers especially seem to view service workers as part of some invisible class that exists solely for their comfort. I've served investment bankers worth millions who leave me a $2 tip on a $50 bill. I've watched real estate moguls close deals worth more than my neighborhood is worth, discussing assets and capital gains while I pour their coffee. Their conversations float around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency investments, euros and dollars flowing like rivers I'll never swim in. My Bitcoin portfolio alone is worth more than most people's houses, I once heard a young tech executive boast to his date. He was wearing a watch that probably cost 6 months of my salary, complaining about capital gains taxes on his millions. When I set down his plate, he didn't even pause his conversation. I might as well have been a robot. But you learn to find small victories. When an elderly regular slips an extra $5 bill into my hand and whispers, "Buy yourself something nice." When a young couple on their first date thanks me for recommending the chocolate cake. When a construction worker jokes with me about the weather and asks about my daughter. These moments remind me I'm human, that I matter. The hardest part isn't the physical exhaustion, though my body feels like it's held together by caffeine and determination. The hardest part is the emotional invisibility, being treated like background noise while life happens around you, watching people discuss fortunes and investments and business deals that could change everything, knowing that no matter how hard I work, I'll never have access to that world. I've served CEOs and celebrities, politicians, and tech millionaires. I've listened to them discuss stock options worth more than I'll make in a lifetime, heard them laugh about their multiple homes and luxury vacations, and through it all, I remain invisible, a shadow moving between tables, ensuring their comfort while my own dreams slowly fade. But something was about to change, something that would shatter the invisible walls between their world and mine, something that would prove that sometimes the person serving your coffee sees more than you ever imagine. It was a Tuesday in March when she walked in. The millionaire's daughter. Everyone in New York knew about Victoria Ashworth. Her father built half the luxury condos in Manhattan, his real estate empire worth billions. His investment portfolio included everything from Wall Street stocks to international cryptocurrency holdings. The Ashworth name was synonymous with wealth, power, and Manhattan's elite social circles. But the woman who stumbled through Murphy's glass door that evening looked nothing like the magazine photos. Victoria Ashworth's usually perfect blonde hair hung in tangles around her shoulders. Her designer coat, probably worth more than I make in 6 months, was wrinkled and stained. Her makeup was smeared, mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. She looked like someone who had been running, or hiding, or maybe just falling apart. The diner went quiet. Not completely silent, but that kind of hushed whisper quiet that happens when something dramatic unfolds. The construction workers at the counter turned to stare. The college students in booth 4 stopped scrolling their phones. Even the cook, Miguel, peered through the service window with curiosity. Victoria stood in the entrance, swaying slightly, looking lost in a place that probably felt like another planet to someone from her world. Her eyes swept the room desperately, like she was searching for something. Sanctuary, maybe, or just a place where nobody would judge her. That's when he walked in behind her. Marcus Bentley. I recognized him from newspaper photos, Society pages, charity galas, the kind of events where people wear $1,000 gowns and discuss their stock portfolios over champagne. He was everything you'd expect from old Manhattan money. Silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive suit, the kind of confident smirk that comes from never doubting your place in the world. "Victoria, you're embarrassing yourself," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when they're annoyed. Not angry, exactly, but irritated the way you'd be irritated by a malfunctioning appliance. "This is beneath you. Beneath us." She turned to face him, and I could see her hands shaking. "I can't do this anymore, Marcus. I can't pretend everything is fine when it's not." He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough for those of us nearby to miss his words. "Your father's businesses, his investments, his entire financial empire depends on maintaining appearances. You think your little breakdown matters more than billions in assets? More than the family fortune?" The cruelty in his tone made my stomach clench. I'd heard wealthy customers dismiss service workers, but this was different. This was someone destroying another person's soul with calculated precision. "You're nothing without your family's money," Marcus continued, his voice getting louder, more confident as he noticed the diner's attention. "Look at you. You can't even hold yourself together for one evening. What would you be without Daddy's billions? Just another broken woman in a city full of disappointments." Victoria's face crumpled. Whatever strength had carried her into the diner was dissolving under his assault. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to become smaller, invisible, a feeling I knew all too well. The other customers were watching now like it was entertainment. Some filmed with their phones, others whispered to their companions. Nobody stepped in, nobody said anything. They just watched this woman being torn apart for their amusement. That's when something stirred in my chest. Maybe it was recognition. I knew what it felt like to be humiliated in public, to be treated like your feelings didn't matter. Maybe it was basic human decency. Or maybe it was just that, after 37 years of watching from the sidelines, I couldn't stand to watch someone else become invisible. I walked over, my worn shoes quiet on the checkered floor. My voice was steady when I spoke, though my heart was pounding. "Ma'am, would you like to sit down? I can get you some coffee, something warm." Marcus turned to look at me like I was an irritating insect that had the audacity to speak. "Excuse me, waitress, but this is a private conversation." "This is a public place," I replied, still looking at Victoria, "and she looks like she could use some kindness." Victoria's eyes met mine, and something passed between us. Recognition, maybe. The understanding between two people who knew what it felt like to be treated as less than human. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I'd like to sit down." I guided her to booth 7 in the back corner, away from the gawking customers. Marcus followed, his face red with indignation. "Do you know who you're talking to?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea what this woman is worth? What her family is worth?" I looked at him directly, something I'd trained myself not to do with wealthy customers. I know she's a human being who deserves basic respect, same as anyone else. "She's worth hundreds of millions," he continued, like net worth was the only measurement of human value. Her trust fund alone could buy this entire block. Her father's investment portfolio includes everything from gold reserves to international Bitcoin holdings. She has more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. "Money doesn't make you better than anyone else," I said, pouring coffee into a clean white mug, "and it doesn't give you the right to tear someone apart in public." The words hung in the air like smoke. The diner had gone completely quiet now. Even Miguel had stopped cooking to listen. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, apparently unused to being challenged by someone he considered beneath his notice. Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm mug and looked up at me with something that might have been gratitude. "What's your name?" "Rosa Martinez." "Rosa," she repeated, like she was testing how it felt to say it. "Thank you for treating me like a person. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee slosh. "This is ridiculous. Victoria, we're leaving, now." But Victoria didn't move. She sat in that vinyl booth, holding her coffee cup like an anchor, and shook her head. "No, I'm staying here for a while." "Fine," Marcus snarled, his composure finally cracking. "But don't come crying to me when your father cuts off your allowance. Don't come begging when you realize you're nothing without the family fortune. You want to slum it with the help? Be my guest." He stormed out, leaving Victoria sitting in the booth with tears streaming down her face. The other customers gradually returned to their conversations, the show apparently over. But I stayed nearby, refilling her coffee, bringing her tissues, just being present while she gathered herself back together. "He's not wrong, you know," Victoria said eventually. "I don't know who I am without my family's money. I've never had to figure it out." "Money doesn't define you," I told her. "How you treat people defines you. How you respond when life gets hard defines you." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Easy for you to say. You've probably never had everything handed to you and then had to figure out what you're actually worth." I paused, considering her words. "You're right. I've never had that problem. I've had the opposite problem. Working my whole life and still being treated like I don't matter. But maybe we both know what it feels like to be invisible." Victoria looked at me sharply, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "Yes," she said softly. "Maybe we do." That night, after Victoria finally left, taking a taxi instead of whatever luxury car had brought her, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Here was someone with more wealth than I could imagine, someone whose father's business empire and stock market investments represented more money than entire neighborhoods, and she felt as lost and worthless as I sometimes did after a 12-hour shift of being ignored. I went home to my small apartment, my feet aching and my uniform smelling like coffee and grease. Carmen was studying at the kitchen table, her nursing textbook spread around her laptop. She looked up when I came in. "Hard day, Mom." "Different day," I said, kissing the top of her head. "How are the studies going?" "Good. I got an A on my pharmacology exam." Her pride was infectious, warming something in my chest that had been cold all day. "I'm so proud of you, Mika. So proud." As I changed into my pajamas and prepared for bed, I thought about Victoria Ashworth crying in booth 7, feeling worthless despite having access to more money than most people could dream of. I thought about Marcus Bentley's cruelty, the way he weaponized her family's wealth to make her feel small. And I thought about how sometimes the richest people can be the poorest in the ways that actually matter. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would change both of our lives in ways neither of us could imagine. The next few days at Murphy's Diner passed quietly, but I found myself glancing at the door more often, wondering if Victoria would return. She didn't. But the energy in the diner felt different somehow. The other waitresses had heard about the incident, and there was a new kind of awareness in how we moved through our shifts. Maria, who'd been working at Murphy's almost as long as I had, pulled me aside during our break. "Rosa, that was something else the other night, standing up to that rich man like that." "I just did what anyone should do," I said, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have gotten involved. Most people would have minded their own business. "No." Maria shook her head. "Most people would have stayed quiet, especially with someone that wealthy. That took courage." I hadn't thought of it as courage. It had just felt like the right thing to do. But maybe that's what courage really is. Doing the right thing even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it might have consequences. Those consequences came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Mr. Peterson called me into his small office behind the kitchen. The space was cramped and smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke, though he'd quit smoking years ago. He didn't ask me to sit down, which was never a good sign. "Rosa, we need to talk about Tuesday night." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" "I've been getting calls. Important calls. People are saying you were inappropriate with customers, that you inserted yourself into a private situation. I was doing my job, serving customers, making sure everyone felt welcome. Peterson shook his head, avoiding eye contact. Look, Rosa, you've been a good employee for a long time, but this place depends on a certain type of clientele. Rich people have friends, and those friends have friends. Word gets around. So you're saying I should have let someone be verbally abused in the diner? Just stood by and watched? I'm saying you should remember your place. His words hit like a slap. You're here to serve food and pour coffee, not to play therapist or get involved in rich people's problems. The unfairness of it burned in my throat. And what's my place exactly? Invisible? Silent? Just take orders and shut up. Rosa, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Peterson finally looked at me, and I could see he didn't like this conversation any more than I did. But that didn't stop him from having it. I've got to let you go. The words seemed to echo in the small room. Let you go. Such a gentle way to say fired, dismissed, discarded. For treating a customer with kindness? For causing problems I can't afford to have. I thought about my bills, about Carmen's tuition, about the 37 years I'd given to this place. I thought about all the double shifts, all the rude customers I'd served with a smile, all the times I'd stayed late to help without being asked. When? End of the week, I'll give you 2 weeks severance pay. 2 weeks pay for 37 years of loyalty. The generosity was overwhelming. I cleaned out my small locker in silence. A spare apron, comfortable shoes for when my feet got too sore, a photo of Carmen from her high school graduation, 37 years reduced to items that fit in a plastic grocery bag. The other waitresses were devastated. Maria cried, which made me cry. Janet hugged me and whispered, "This isn't fair, Rosa. This isn't right." But fair and right didn't pay the bills or keep the lights on. Fair and right didn't explain to Carmen why her mother was suddenly unemployed in her senior semester. I rode the subway home in a haze of shock and worry. The familiar rattle and clank of the train cars seemed louder somehow, more jarring. 45 minutes to think about what came next, what I would tell Carmen, how I would make the rent next month. When I got home, Carmen was at her part-time job at the campus bookstore. I sat at our small kitchen table, still wearing my uniform for what would be one of the last times, and stared at the bills stacked beside the salt and pepper shakers. Rent, electricity, Carmen's school expenses, my mother's medication, numbers that didn't care about fairness or justice or doing the right thing. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of financial anxiety. This was the reality of standing up to wealthy people when you're invisible. They could make you disappear completely. But as I sat there in my coffee-stained uniform, something strange happened. Instead of regret, I felt a small flame of pride burning in my chest. I had stood up for someone who needed it. I had treated a human being with dignity when everyone else was treating her like entertainment. And if that was worth losing my job over, maybe it said more about the world than it did about me. Carmen came home around 8 o'clock, tired from her shift, but cheerful. She started telling me about her day, about a difficult customer who couldn't find the textbook they needed, about a professor who praised her latest assignment. I let her talk, postponing the moment when I'd have to shatter her good mood with our new reality. Finally, when she paused to make herself a sandwich, I found the words, "Carmen, we need to talk about something." She looked up from the bread and peanut butter, noting something in my tone. "What's wrong, Mom?" "I lost my job today." The peanut butter jar nearly slipped from her hands. "What? Why? What happened?" I told her the story. About Victoria Ashworth, about standing up to Marcus Bentley, about Peterson's phone calls from important people. Carmen listened with growing indignation, her eyes flashing with anger. "They fired you for being decent? For treating someone with kindness? They fired me for forgetting my place. Your place?" Carmen's voice rose. "Your place is to be a good person, which you are. Your place is to stand up for what's right, which you did. My place is to pay the bills and keep you in school, and now I don't know how I'm going to do that." Carmen set down the jar and came around the table to hug me. "We'll figure it out, Mom. We always do." But as I held my daughter in our small kitchen, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, I wondered if this time was different. If this time doing the right thing had cost us more than we could afford. The next few days blurred together in a haze of job applications and growing anxiety. I walked the streets of the Lower East Side, stopping at every restaurant, every diner, every cafe that might need an experienced waitress. But word travels fast in the service industry, especially when it involves rich customers and fired employees. "We're not hiring right now, but we'll call if anything changes," became the phrase I heard most often, usually delivered with sympathetic eyes and apologetic shrugs. What they didn't say, but what I heard clearly, was that they'd heard about Murphy's Diner, about the millionaire's daughter, about the waitress who'd forgotten her place. At night, I lay awake calculating and recalculating our expenses, trying to figure out how long our savings would last. Carmen had offered to quit school and get a full-time job, but I refused to let her sacrifice her future for my mistake, though mistake seemed like the wrong word for treating someone with basic human dignity. It was during one of these sleepless nights about a week after losing my job that I heard a soft knock at my door. Carmen was asleep, and it was nearly midnight. I peered through the peephole and saw a young woman in a baseball cap pulled low over her face. Victoria Ashworth looked different without designer clothes and perfect makeup. Younger somehow, more human. I opened the door and she looked up at me with eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault." "How did you find where I live?" "I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds creepy, but I had to find you. I had to apologize." She paused, wrapping her arms around herself. "I heard you lost your job. Because of me. Because of what happened at the diner." I stepped aside to let her in, glancing down the hallway to make sure none of my neighbors were watching. The last thing I needed was more drama. Victoria sat on my old couch, looking around the small living room with curious eyes. Not judgmental, exactly, but clearly noting the differences between her world and mine. The secondhand furniture, the family photos and discount store frames, the basic cable TV that was probably older than she was. "I've never been in an apartment like this," she said quietly. "I mean, I've never been in a normal person's home." "This is how most people live, Victoria, without trust funds and investment portfolios and family fortunes." She winced at my words. "I know. I'm starting to realize how isolated I've been, how little I understand about real life." "Why are you here?" Victoria took a deep breath. "Because you're the first person in years who treated me like a human being instead of a bank account, and because that kindness cost you everything. That's not right. It's done. I'll find another job." "Will you?" "Because I've been asking around, and the story is already out there. The waitress who embarrassed Marcus Bentley, the service worker who forgot her place and got fired for it." Her words confirmed my worst fears. In a city like New York, reputation mattered, especially in service industries where wealthy customers held all the power. "I want to help," Victoria continued. "I want to make this right." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I have resources. I have money. More money than I know what to do with, honestly." I looked at this young woman sitting in my living room, offering help with the casual confidence that came from never worrying about bills or rent. "Victoria, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't want charity." "It's not charity. It's justice. You lost your job because you defended me. That makes it my responsibility. Your responsibility is to figure out who you are without your father's money. Isn't that what you said?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, but maybe helping you is part of figuring that out. Maybe doing something meaningful with all this wealth is part of discovering who I really am." I studied her face in the dim light of my table lamp. There was something different about her now, something more solid than the broken woman who'd stumbled into Murphy's Diner. as if making a decision to help someone else had given her a foundation to stand on. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that you know more about serving people, about hospitality, about making customers feel valued than anyone I've ever met, and I'm thinking that maybe we could start something together. Something that treats both employees and customers with dignity. You want to open a restaurant? I want to create something better, something where the people doing the work are respected, where nobody is invisible, where kindness matters more than how much money you have." The idea was both tempting and terrifying. Starting a business with someone I barely knew, someone from a completely different world. But as I looked around my small apartment, thinking about the bills stacked on my kitchen table and Carmen's tuition payments, the risk started to seem worth taking. Where would we even begin? Victoria smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it was a genuine smile full of hope. "With finding the right location, I know a place in Brooklyn that just became available. The owner is a friend of my father's, and he owes me a favor." "Brooklyn's expensive." "Not for me. Money is one thing I definitely have." I thought about Peterson's words about remembering my place, about Marcus Bentley's cruelty, about all the years of being invisible while serving people who saw me as furniture. Maybe it was time to create a place where nobody had to be invisible. "Okay," I said, "let's do it." Victoria's smile grew wider. "Really?" "Really. But we do this as partners, equal partners. I won't be your employee and you won't be my charity case." "Equal partners," she agreed, extending her hand for me to shake. "Though I should probably warn you, I don't know anything about running a restaurant." "Good thing I've been watching how not to do it for 37 years. We shook hands in my small living room, sealing a partnership that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. A millionaire's daughter and an unemployed waitress, joining forces to create something neither of us could build alone. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of permits, renovations, and steep learning curves. Victoria had money, but I had experience. She had connections, but I had practical knowledge. Together, we slowly transformed an empty space in Park Slope into something that felt like home. We called it Mesa, Spanish for table, a place where everyone could gather as equals. The interior design was warm and welcoming, with exposed brick walls, plants in every corner, and comfortable seating that invited people to linger. We hired carefully, looking for staff who understood that serving others was an honor, not a burden. But the real test would come when we opened our doors to the public. Would our vision of dignity and respect survive contact with actual customers? Would New York's demanding diners accept a place where the staff were treated as people instead of servants? The night before our grand opening, Victoria and I sat in the empty restaurant sharing a bottle of wine and looking around at what we'd built together. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if we're wrong? What if people don't want this kind of place?" "Then we'll have created something beautiful anyway," Victoria said. "And we'll have proven that invisible people can become visible when they decide to stand together." I raised my glass. "To becoming visible. To becoming visible," she echoed, and we toasted to whatever came next. The opening day of Mesa arrived with typical New York spring weather, gray skies and intermittent drizzle that seemed to match my nervous energy. Victoria and I had been at the restaurant since 5 a.m, checking and rechecking everything. The coffee machines, the kitchen equipment, the reservation system, the staff schedules. Carmen had come to help, taking a day off from classes to support what she called Mom's Grand Adventure. Our first customer arrived at 7:30, 15 minutes before we officially opened. An older gentleman with a weathered face and paint-stained hands, probably a construction worker heading to an early job. He looked uncertain as he peered through the glass door. I let him in with a genuine smile. "Good morning. We're not quite open yet, but I can get you coffee and breakfast if you'd like." "You sure? I don't want to be a bother." "No bother at all. What would you like?" As I poured his coffee and took his order for eggs and toast, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my 37 years of waitressing. Pure joy in serving someone. Not the forced cheerfulness that came with hoping for a good tip, but genuine pleasure in making someone's morning a little brighter. "This is a nice place," the man said, looking around at the warm lighting and comfortable chairs. "Feels different from most places around here." "How so?" He shrugged. "Feels like you actually want me here." That simple comment filled my chest with warmth. He was right. We did want him there. We wanted everyone to feel wanted. By noon, Mesa was full. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood. A new restaurant where the staff smiled like they meant it, where the food was good and reasonably priced, where nobody made you feel rushed or unwelcome. I was refilling coffee for a table of young mothers when I noticed him, Marcus Bentley, standing near the entrance, surveying the room with his trademark smirk. He was impeccably dressed, as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, but there was something different about his posture, less confident maybe, more uncertain. Victoria saw him too. She was across the room talking with customers at a corner table, but I could see her body tense when she spotted him. Marcus chose a table in the center of the restaurant, probably to ensure maximum visibility. He wanted to be seen. Wanted people to notice that he was here in this little Brooklyn cafe that had become the talk of the neighborhood. I approached his table with steady hands and a professional smile. "Good afternoon. Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up at me with surprise, as if he'd expected someone else to take his order. Well, the famous Rosa Martinez, the waitress who forgot her place and became a restaurant owner. "I remembered my place," I corrected him. "My place is treating people with dignity and respect." How noble. His tone was mocking, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "And how's business? Making enough to pay the bills? Or are you relying on Daddy's money like your partner?" "We're doing very well, thank you." "What can I get you for lunch?" Marcus ordered a sandwich and continued to make pointed comments about the restaurant, the neighborhood, the likelihood of success for a business run by people like us. But I noticed something interesting as the meal progressed. Other customers were watching him, and not with admiration. The young mothers at the nearby table exchanged glances when he raised his voice. A businessman in the corner booth shook his head when Marcus made a dismissive comment about service people thinking they can run businesses. The older gentleman, who'd been our first customer that morning, actually turned around to stare when Marcus suggested that Victoria and I were playing restaurant with Daddy's money. New York diners might be tough, but they recognized bullying when they saw it, and they didn't like it. When Marcus finished eating and asked for his check, I placed it on the table with the same professional courtesy I'd shown every other customer. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." He looked at the bill, then reached for his wallet. "You know, Rosa, this little experiment of yours won't last. Rich people's charity projects never do. When Victoria gets bored playing with poor people, you'll be right back where you started, invisible and unemployed." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll know I tried to create something better instead of just tearing other people down." Marcus left exact change for the bill, no tip, of course, and walked out without another word. But his departure felt different from his dramatic exit at Murphy's Diner. This time he seemed smaller, less powerful. Like a man whose primary weapon, the ability to make others feel worthless, had somehow lost its effectiveness. Victoria appeared at my side as the door closed behind him. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "He was trying to upset you." "I know, but look around." I gestured to the dining room, still full of customers enjoying their meals, engaged in conversation, laughing with friends. He's just one person with one opinion, and his opinion doesn't define this place or what we're building here. Victoria smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. I just never had a platform to show it." That evening, after the last customer had left and we'd finished cleaning up, Victoria and I sat at the bar counting the day's receipts. We'd exceeded our projected sales by 40%. And the comment cards were overwhelmingly positive. "People keep mentioning how welcome they felt," Victoria said, reading through the feedback, "how the staff treated them like family, how the atmosphere was warm and genuine." That's because it is genuine. When you treat employees with respect, they pass that respect along to customers. When you create a place where everyone matters, everyone can feel it. Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying the receipts in her hands. "Rosa, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "This is the first time in my life that I've felt proud of something I've accomplished. Not something my family accomplished or something my trust fund paid for, but something I actually helped build. We built it together. Yes, but you believed it was possible. You had the vision. I just had the money to make it happen." I looked at this woman who'd walked into Murphy's Diner broken and lost, and who was now counting receipts from our successful restaurant opening with genuine pride shining in her eyes. "Money alone can't create something like this," I told her. "It takes both of us. Your resources and my experience, your connections and my understanding of what customers really want. Neither of us could have done this alone." "Equal partners," she said, echoing our original agreement. "Equal partners." As we locked up Mesa that night and walked out into the Brooklyn evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just hope for financial stability, though that was part of it, but hope for a future where invisible people could become visible. Where dignity wasn't determined by bank account balances, where treating others with respect was valued more than net worth. The months that followed our opening were a blur of long days, steep learning curves, and steady growth. Mesa quickly became a neighborhood favorite, known not just for good food, but for an atmosphere where everyone, customers and staff alike, felt valued and respected. We hired more employees as business grew, always looking for people who understood that service was about more than taking orders and delivering food. Maria from Murphy's Diner joined us, finally able to work somewhere that appreciated her 20 years of experience. We hired single mothers who needed flexible schedules, older workers who'd been dismissed as overqualified by other restaurants, and young people just starting their careers who wanted to learn hospitality done right. But success brought its own challenges. As Mesa's reputation spread, we started attracting attention from food critics, lifestyle magazines, and social media influencers. Some of the coverage was positive, praising our authentic approach to hospitality and genuine community atmosphere. But other coverage focused on the novelty of a millionaire's daughter partnering with a former waitress, turning our story into entertainment rather than examining what we were actually trying to accomplish. "Heiress plays restaurateur with working-class partner," read one headline that made my stomach clench. "From diner to owner, a Cinderella story," announced another. They were missing the point entirely, reducing our partnership to a feel-good narrative instead of recognizing it as a serious business built on mutual respect and shared vision. The worst came from Marcus Bentley himself, who had apparently made criticizing Mesa into a personal mission. He wrote op-eds for society magazines about misguided charity projects masquerading as businesses. He posted on social media about rich girls playing with poor people's lives. He even showed up at industry events, warning other wealthy diners about the unprofessional atmosphere at restaurants where staff were allowed to forget their place. His campaign might have been more effective if Mesa wasn't thriving despite his efforts. Our reservations stayed booked weeks in advance. Our staff turnover was nearly zero, unheard of in an industry known for constant employee churn. Our profit margins were healthy, and our customer satisfaction scores were off the charts. But Marcus's attacks did take their toll, especially on Victoria. She'd worked hard to build confidence in her ability to contribute something meaningful to the world, and his constant assertions that she was just playing restaurant with daddy's money undermined that progress. Maybe he's right. she said one evening as we went over the books in her apartment overlooking Central Park. Her penthouse was everything you'd expect from someone worth hundreds of millions. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive art, furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars, but it felt sterile compared to the warmth of Mesa. Right about what? That I'm just a rich girl playing at being a businesswoman, that without my trust fund, this never would have happened. Victoria, look at these numbers. I spread the financial reports across her marble coffee table. We're profitable. We're growing. We're providing good jobs for 23 people and serving thousands of satisfied customers every month. Whatever your motivations were when we started, the results speak for themselves. But I didn't earn this money. I don't deserve it. None of us choose the circumstances we're born into. You were born wealthy. I was born working class. Carmen was born to a single mother in Queens. None of that defines our worth as human beings. Victoria was quiet, staring out at the Manhattan skyline where her father's real estate developments created a jagged horizon of glass and steel. The real question, I continued, is what you choose to do with the circumstances you're given. You could have stayed miserable, letting Marcus and people like him convince you that you're worthless without your family name. Instead, you chose to build something positive. That choice matters more than where the startup money came from. Do you really believe that? I know it. Because I've watched you grow into someone who understands the value of hard work, who treats employees fairly, who cares about creating something meaningful. That's not your trust fund talking. That's you. Victoria turned away from the window to face me. What if we lose everything? What if Marcus is right and this is all just a fantasy that can't sustain itself? Then we'll have tried. We'll have created jobs and served good food and treated people with dignity for as long as it lasted. That's more than most people accomplish with their lives. But even as I said the words, I could feel the weight of our vulnerability. We'd built something beautiful, but it existed in a world where Marcus Bentley and people like him held most of the power. The wealthy customers who could make or break restaurants, the investors who controlled commercial real estate, the social media influencers who shaped public opinion, they were all part of a system that preferred invisible service workers to stay invisible. A few weeks later, that vulnerability became uncomfortably clear when Victoria received a call from her father. Richard Ashworth was old-money Manhattan aristocracy, the kind of man who owned buildings instead of apartments, who measured wealth in assets rather than income, whose investment portfolio included everything from stock market holdings to cryptocurrency reserves worth hundreds of millions. He was also, according to Victoria, a man who'd never spoken to her about anything more personal than quarterly trust fund distributions. "He wants to meet with me," Victoria told me after hanging up the phone, "about my recent business ventures." That sounds ominous. Everything about my father sounds ominous. He doesn't make social calls. We agreed to meet at Mesa after closing that night to discuss strategy, but I could see the anxiety building in Victoria's shoulders as the day wore on. Whatever confidence she'd gained from our restaurant's success seemed to evaporate at the mention of her father's name. Richard Ashworth arrived at Mesa precisely on time, which somehow felt aggressive in its punctuality. He was everything I'd expected from Victoria's descriptions and newspaper photos. Tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed in the understated way that only truly wealthy people managed. His handshake was firm and brief, his smile polite but cold. "Ms. Martinez, I presume. I've heard quite a lot about you." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Ashworth." "Is it?" His tone suggested that remained to be seen. "Victoria, thank you for arranging this meeting. We have quite a lot to discuss." Victoria had reserved a corner table for privacy, though the restaurant was empty except for Carmen, who was helping with inventory in the back. Richard surveyed the dining room with the calculating gaze of someone used to evaluating real estate investments. "Charming," he said, though it didn't sound like a compliment. "Very quaint. This is what you've been doing with your time?" "This is our restaurant," Victoria replied, her voice steady but quiet. Rosa and I are business partners. Yes, I've heard about your partnership. It's been quite the topic of conversation in certain circles. The way he said certain circles made it clear he didn't mean the kind of circles that would appreciate what we'd built. The food is excellent, I offered. Would you like to try something? The kitchen is closed, but I could... That won't be necessary. Richard's attention remained focused on Victoria. I think we need to discuss your future, my dear, and the impact your current activities are having on the family's reputation. What impact? Surely you've seen the coverage in the society pages. Ashworth heiress plays restaurant owner. Trust fund baby experiments with working-class partners. It's becoming an embarrassment. Victoria's face flushed. An embarrassment to whom? To the family. To the businesses that depend on our reputation for serious, profitable investments. To the social and professional networks that we've spent generations building. I felt anger rising in my chest. Mr. Ashworth, your daughter has built a successful business that employs nearly 24 people and has become a positive force in this community. Why is that embarrassing? He turned his cool gaze on me for the first time since we'd sat down. Ms. Martinez, I'm sure you mean well, but you don't understand the complexities of managing significant wealth. Every action Victoria takes reflects not just on her, but on a business empire worth billions. My real estate holdings, my stock market investments, my cryptocurrency portfolio, my gold reserves, all of it depends on maintaining credibility with serious investors and business partners. And a successful restaurant undermines that credibility? A successful restaurant run by qualified professionals would not. A restaurant run by someone with no business experience, in partnership with... He paused, searching for tactful words. Someone from outside our usual business networks raises questions about judgment and stability. The insult was delivered so smoothly it took a moment to fully register. Someone from outside our usual business networks, a polite way of saying someone like me didn't belong in business with someone like Victoria. Rosa has more hospitality experience than anyone I know, Victoria said, finding her voice. She worked as a waitress for 37 years. She understands customer service better than any MBA program could teach. I'm sure she's very good at taking orders, Richard replied, but running a business requires different skills: financial management, strategic planning, understanding market dynamics. These aren't things you learn by carrying trays. The condescension in his tone was breathtaking. 37 years of experience reduced to taking orders. Decades of managing difficult customers, solving complex service problems, and understanding what made people feel valued, dismissed as irrelevant to business success. Mr. Ashworth, I said, keeping my voice level, I've been managing budgets, schedules, and customer relations for decades. I've worked under pressure, solved problems on the fly, and built relationships with people from every walk of life. Those are business skills, even if I didn't learn them in a boardroom. Perhaps. But they're not the skills needed to manage the kind of wealth Victoria has access to. Her trust fund alone generates more income than this restaurant will see in 5 years. Her inheritance includes investments, properties, and business interests that span the globe. This little cafe experiment, charming as it may be, isn't preparing her for those responsibilities. Victoria had been growing quieter as her father spoke, sinking into herself the way she had that first night at Murphy's Diner. I could see her confidence evaporating under his careful, clinical dismantling of everything we'd built together. What exactly are you asking Victoria to do? I asked. I'm asking her to come home, to take her proper place in the family business, to stop playing restaurant and start preparing for the real responsibilities she'll inherit. And if she chooses to stay? Richard's smile was thin and cold. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Victoria might be worth hundreds of millions, but her father controlled those assets, and he wasn't above using that control to force compliance. After Richard left, Victoria sat in the empty restaurant with tears streaming down her face. All the strength she'd built over the past months seemed to crumble in the space of one conversation with her father. "Maybe he's right," she whispered. "Maybe I am just playing at being a businesswoman. Maybe I should go back to my real life and stop dragging you down with me. Victoria, look at me." I waited until she lifted her eyes from the table. "Your father is threatened by what you've accomplished here. He's scared that you found something meaningful that doesn't depend on his control. He controls my money. Without his approval, I could lose everything." "You could lose his money, but you wouldn't lose yourself. You wouldn't lose the skills you've learned or the relationships you've built or the knowledge that you can create something positive in the world. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'd have to give up hundreds of millions." Her words stung, but I understood the fear behind them. "You're right. I can't imagine having that much money or losing it. But I can imagine what it feels like to be controlled by someone who doesn't see your value. I spent 37 years being invisible to people who thought their wealth made them better than me. Don't let your father make you invisible too." Victoria was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded on the table. "What if he cuts me off? What if he takes away my trust fund and my inheritance? Then we'll figure out how to run Mesa without Daddy's money. We'll get loans, find investors, work longer hours. It won't be easy, but it's possible." "You'd be willing to do that? To risk everything we've built?" "Victoria, everything we've built came from partnership, not just money. Your father can take away your trust fund, but he can't take away what you've learned about running a business or treating people with respect. Those skills belong to you now." But even as I said the words, I could see the doubt in her eyes. A lifetime of dependence on family wealth wasn't easy to overcome, especially when that wealth represented security beyond most people's wildest dreams. The next few days passed in uncomfortable tension. Victoria was quiet, distracted, clearly struggling with her father's ultimatum. Our staff noticed the change in her demeanor, and I found myself working extra hours to compensate for her absence of mind. The resolution came in a way none of us expected. Carmen had been working late, helping with inventory, when she noticed something odd about our credit card processing statements. Charges that didn't match our actual sales, fees that seemed excessive, transaction costs that were dramatically higher than industry standards. "Moms, look at this," she said, spreading the paperwork across a table in the empty dining room. "These processing fees are way too high, and some of these charges don't match our records at all." I studied the documents with growing concern. Carmen was right. The numbers didn't add up. We were being overcharged significantly, which explained why our profit margins were smaller than they should be given our sales volume. "Who handles our credit card processing?" Carmen checked the paperwork. "Bentley Financial Services." The name hit like a physical blow. Marcus Bentley owned the company handling our financial transactions, which meant he had access to our sales data, customer information, and the ability to manipulate our costs. "How long has this been going on?" "Looks like since we opened. Mom, if these fees were at normal rates, we'd be making 30% more profit every month." I felt sick thinking about how Marcus had been systematically undermining our business from the inside, using his financial services company to slowly bleed us dry while publicly questioning our competence and sustainability. But as the initial shock faded, another feeling emerged: relief. Finally, we had concrete evidence of Marcus's efforts to destroy Mesa. Finally, Victoria could see that our struggles weren't due to her inexperience or my inadequacy, but to deliberate sabotage. When I called Victoria with the news, her reaction was swift and decisive. "I'm calling my lawyer," she said. "If Marcus thinks he can manipulate our business and make us fail to prove his point, he's about to learn that I'm not as helpless as he assumed. Victoria, be careful. He still has connections, still has influence. So do I. And unlike Marcus, I have documentation of actual wrongdoing instead of just opinions about who deserves success." The legal battle that followed was swift and decisive. Marcus Bentley's financial services company had overcharged Mesa by nearly $40,000 over the course of our first year in business. More damaging, they had shared our confidential financial information with competitors and potential investors, violating multiple privacy and business ethics laws. When the story broke in the business press, the narrative around Mesa shifted dramatically. We weren't naive dreamers in over our heads. We were accomplished business people who had built a successful restaurant despite systematic sabotage from a jealous competitor. The settlement was significant enough to secure Mesa's financial future for years to come. But more importantly, the revelation of Marcus's fraudulent practices destroyed his credibility with the wealthy social circles he'd used to attack us. "Justice has a funny way of working itself out," Victoria said as we celebrated with champagne in our newly secure restaurant. "Sometimes, when you're willing to fight for it." "I almost gave up, you know. I almost let my father's threats scare me away from everything we built here." "But you didn't. When it mattered, you chose to fight." Victoria smiled, and I could see the confidence that had been growing over the past months fully restored in her eyes. Equal partners? Equal partners. The success of Mesa over the following year exceeded our wildest expectations. We opened a second location in Manhattan, then a third in Queens. Each restaurant maintained the same philosophy: treating staff with respect, creating an atmosphere where everyone felt valued, proving that profitability and human dignity weren't mutually exclusive. Victoria had found her calling in hospitality management, taking courses in business administration while applying everything she learned to our growing company. I had discovered leadership skills I never knew I possessed, managing teams of employees who looked to me for guidance and inspiration. But perhaps the most satisfying development was watching our former detractors slowly change their tune. Food critics who had initially dismissed Mesa as a novelty concept began praising our authentic approach to hospitality. Business magazines wrote articles about our employee-first management style and its impact on customer satisfaction. Even some of Marcus Bentley's former allies began to distance themselves from his bitter campaign against our success. When someone is revealed to be a fraud, their opinions about other people's achievements suddenly carry much less weight. Marcus himself seemed to disappear from New York's social scene after the legal settlement. Whether he left the city or simply retreated from public view, his voice was no longer part of the conversation about Mesa or its founders. Richard Ashworth, true to form, made no public acknowledgement of his daughter's success or his own misjudgment of our partnership. But he also stopped pressuring Victoria to abandon the restaurant business, which felt like a form of grudging acceptance. "I think he's realized that fighting me just brings negative attention to the family," Victoria explained. "Better to ignore my success than to keep predicting my failure and being proven wrong." "Does that bother you? Not getting recognition from your father?" "Not anymore. I used to need his approval to feel worthwhile. But I've learned that my value doesn't depend on his opinion. The respect of our employees, the satisfaction of our customers, the success of our business. Those things matter more than his approval ever could." It was a level of emotional independence I wasn't sure I could have achieved in her position. Growing up with that much family wealth and social pressure might have made me more dependent on external validation, not less. 2 years after opening Mesa, we were featured on the cover of Restaurant Business magazine as partners who redefined hospitality. The article focused on our employee retention rates, customer satisfaction scores, and financial performance, but also examined the broader implications of our approach to business. Martinez and Ashworth have proven that treating employees with dignity isn't just ethically right, it's financially smart, the article concluded. Their success suggests that the service industry's traditional hierarchy, where workers are invisible and disposable, may be fundamentally flawed. Reading that conclusion in a major business publication felt like vindication for every invisible worker who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or treated as less than human. But the real measure of our success wasn't magazine covers or financial reports. It was the thank you note from Maria, who had been able to buy her first home with the savings from her job at Mesa. It was the pride in Carmen's voice when she told her nursing school classmates that her mother owned restaurants. It was the regular customers who knew our names and asked about our families, who treated our staff like human beings instead of servants. Most of all, it was the transformation I saw in Victoria. From a broken woman crying in a diner booth to a confident business leader who had learned to value herself based on her actions rather than her bank account. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one evening as we sat in the original Mesa location after closing, sharing a bottle of wine and reminiscing about our journey. Regret what? Getting involved with me that night at Murphy's Diner, taking the risk of standing up to Marcus, losing your job and having to start over. I thought about the question seriously. The past 2 years had been challenging in ways I never could have anticipated. The stress of starting a business, the pressure of managing employees, the complexity of dealing with investors and lawyers and health inspectors, the long hours, the constant worry, the weight of responsibility for other people's livelihoods. But I also thought about the alternative. Still working at Murphy's Diner, still invisible, still carrying trays and taking orders from people who never bothered to learn my name. Still going home each night to calculate bills and worry about Carmen's tuition. Still feeling like my life was something that happened to me rather than something I created. "No regrets," I said finally. "Not one." Even though it was harder than either of us expected, especially because it was harder. Easy things don't change you. They don't teach you what you're capable of or show you who you really are. The hard parts were what made it worth doing. Victoria raised her wine glass in a toast. To the hard parts, then. To the hard parts. As we sat in our restaurant, our successful, thriving restaurant built on mutual respect and shared dreams, I thought about all the invisible people still out there, still serving coffee and clearing tables, still being talked through instead of talked to, still believing that their place in the world was determined by other people's opinions of their worth. I thought about the waitresses at Murphy's Diner, still smiling at customers who didn't see them, about the housekeepers in luxury hotels, still cleaning rooms for guests who treated them like furniture, about the retail workers and food service employees and home health aides who make other people's lives comfortable while remaining invisible themselves. And I hoped that somehow our story might reach some of them, might show them that invisible doesn't mean powerless, that serving others with dignity is a strength rather than a weakness, that the right partnership can transform both people involved. Most of all, I hope they might see that their worth isn't determined by how much money they have or how others treat them, but by how they choose to treat themselves and others. That dignity is something you claim, not something you wait to be given. 3 years after that first night at Murphy's Diner, Mesa had become more than a restaurant. It was a proof of concept, proof that businesses could be profitable while treating employees fairly, proof that customers valued authentic hospitality over performative service, proof that partnerships across class lines could create something neither person could achieve alone. But the most important proof was personal. Victoria had discovered that her worth wasn't tied to her trust fund, and I had learned that being invisible was a choice, not a permanent condition. We had both found our voices in a world that preferred us to stay quiet, and in doing so, we had created something that would outlast both of us, a place where nobody had to be invisible, where everyone's dignity mattered, where service was an honor rather than a burden. As I lock the door of Mesa each night and walk out onto the Brooklyn streets where our story began, I carry with me the knowledge that transformation is always possible, that kindness is never wasted, that standing up for someone else often means standing up for yourself, And I remember that sometimes the person who seems to need help the most is actually the person who helps you discover who you were meant to be all along. Have you ever served others with your heart and been ignored? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, wondering if anyone sees your worth? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your experience matters. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe so it reaches another person who also deserves to be seen and valued. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special podcast filled with stories just as moving. You can find it here by clicking on the left. Thank you for walking this path of the heart with me. I'll see you in our next story.